welcome to my channel. I don't typically deal with model trains, though I do enjoy some model training, but this video is going to be a little different for you. Today we've got this MTH RailKing Wisconsin Southern 2002 locomotive, and it's got a no power issue. So if you run this on track that just has power, it'll go, but none of the features will work, like the horn, the bell. I think this one has automatic couplers, but none of that stuff's working. So let's see if we can't get this guy torn apart, diagnose the issue, fix it, and get this guy back on the rails. Stay tuned. All right, so we've got our locomotive on the tracks here. We've got our RailKing controller hooked up. So what I'm seeing is that if I push bell, horn, whistle, direction, we're getting nothing. If I give it some juice, I don't know if you heard that, but I hear a relay click in the engine, but it doesn't go anywhere. After a second, you get the startup sound, but still not going. You can see the light dims and brightens as we give it more power. The bell doesn't work if we give it lots of juice. If we hit direction, it turns off. And if we let it sit long enough, we do get a bell and a horn as well. So I'm told this is because the battery inside has stopped working. So let's get this guy over to the bench, take it apart, and see if we can't fix this engine. All right, we've got our engine on the bench here. Nice Wisconsin Southern number 2002. So to get these guys apart, if you turn the bogies, there's a screw under each one here. A total of 4 screws. So let's go ahead and take those out. I'm gonna set it on its top very gently, and we'll start with this screw here. All right, so with the screws removed, you can carefully take the top cover off. And if you like, you can disconnect all of these wires, though I don't think you necessarily have to work on them, but I think it makes things just a little bit easier to do it. And when you're disconnecting these clips, you want to be sure to pull on the clip itself and not on the wires. If you pull on the wires, you risk pulling them out of the clip entirely. All right, and then we have our battery here, and that's held in by 2 screws, kind of tucked underneath here. And then the battery should just slide right out of the holder. There's the holder, and 1 screw for it. And here's my other screw. All right, so this battery, let me spin this around. So this battery is clearly corroded. You can see all the white powder here, the white corrosion. And also one of the leads has just completely come out of the connector. So we need to disconnect that, like so. And notice that these other connectors are all color-coded. Red goes to red, green goes to green, blue to blue, and red to red. The battery has a white connector to a black connector here. This is just a standard NiCd nickel-cadmium battery. There's no part number on this one, but it's 2.4 volts, 700 milliamp hours. This one was manufactured in 2009, but obviously it has failed. You can see there's corrosion coming out here, so this is leaked out, and it's leaked all over the inside of the engine. Fortunately, there's no damage to the engine, as far as I can tell, other than all this white powder all over. So the first thing I want to do is clean up the corrosion. And here it's not too bad. I think I'm just going to use some compressed air and just kind of try to blow it out of here. And I see that it's on the bogie as well, but I think we can get most of that out. All right, so that looks pretty good. There's a little bit of residue there, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that up. I've got some 99% isopropyl alcohol. Let's pour some of that in the cap here. And I will use a Q-tip to gently swab out remainder of the corrosion here. It's not super critical to get it all out, but if there is a defect in the paint on the chassis here, then it can start to rust the metal underneath. This paint looks like it's fully intact, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that at this point, but just trying to clean it up, probably for the best. All right, so what I did is I took the specs of this battery. I just went on Amazon and looked up a similar battery. These are pretty standard, and I found this one. So 2.4 volts, 700 milliamp hours, and this is an ICD as well. It doesn't say it, but it is. You don't want to mix lithium ions and nickel cadmiums because they have different recharge circuitry, so you can't put a lithium ion in this engine and expect it to work. It would be bad, but replacing like for like is no problem. Now, one thing I noticed is that the connector for this, which is now like completely corroded and horrible and falling apart, was female. So there's the pins on this side, and I couldn't find any similar connectors on Amazon for any other similar spec batteries. So we'll have to bodge this up a little to get this to connect. I was hoping to be able to reuse this connector, but there is some corrosion on it, as noted, and this entire cable came out. So I was hoping to just snip these cables, solder it together, call it a day, but it looks like we might have a little bit more work to do than that. So I'm going to fire up my soldering iron here, and what I will do is see if I can't just pull this other wire off. And I pulled the pin with it. So there is a ton of corrosion on this connector. And then unfortunately on this side, they don't give you much room to work with, so it's going to be a little difficult to cut this and splice together here, but I think we can make something work. So let's see what we can do with this connector. I think the pin that's in here might be salvageable, but again, there's corrosion already on the connector, so we want to clean that up before we do anything with it, as the corrosion will continue to degrade the metal as we go forward. So if we're going to reuse this, we need to get all of the corrosion off of it. So I'm just going to remove this heat shrink tubing from here and see what it looks like. I imagine it's soldered on. Yep, it's just a pin that's soldered on. So I think we can reuse this one. And this one, we're going to need to do some work to make it reusable. Let me see if I can't just pull this pin out entirely here. I can. All right, so we've got the pin, connector, and we need to get this pin off here. And I'll just use my soldering iron to try to desolder it here. There we go. All right, so now we have both pins, the connector, and the new battery. So this old battery should be recycled. Don't just throw it in the trash. Take it to a proper recycling center. And the next thing I want to do is then stop the corrosion here. To do that, we're just going to use a little bit of technical vinegar, multi-purpose vinegar. So this is 6% acidity, which is stronger than most vinegars you typically get, I think. So I'm going to take a little cup here, pour some vinegar in, and then I'm just going to place my parts in here, make sure they're fully submerged, and just let the vinegar do its magic. So for cleaning these things up, I like to use an electric toothbrush. It's really able to get in there and do some good scrubbing. It would be hard to do by hand. Okay, so now I'm going to put the pins back into the connector here. It looks good. So then the next thing to do is we need to cut this connector off and solder it to the pins here. Now I forget which orientation the pins were on the previous connector, so I'm going to need to match that up to here. Black on the top here, and then we'll have red on the bottom. So let me just make a little mark with pencil to denote the black one. That way I won't mix it up. So when cutting these wires, you want to make sure not to short it. So I'm going to cut them one at a time instead of just snipping both. That way I won't accidentally short the two wires out. So I take the old connector, just toss that in the trash. Keep it as a souvenir, whatever you like. I'm going to go ahead and strip the black wire here a little bit, and then I will tin this wire with some solder. To do that, I'll use my jig to hold the wire. All right, and then we'll solder black to the side with the pencil mark. All right, looks good. And then we will do the red wire. So I will tin the red. All right, and then we will solder, ideally, the red wire to the connector here. So I think that looks pretty good. Since there is some exposed wire here that was previously done in heat shrink tubing, I'm just going to hit it with a little bit of electrical tape just to make sure nothing shorts these out. If you have heat shrink tubing, you can definitely use that as was originally installed. I do have some, but it's unfortunately a much larger size than these little wires. Besides, is it really model railroading if you're not using electric? All right, so with that, I'll take the battery and the new battery and put it in to the holder here. I'll turn this back around. So take the holder, and then I will reconnect the battery, checking one last time to make sure I got black to black and red to red, and I do. I will reconnect that in, and then I will re-secure the battery holder here. Now I can reconnect the connectors for the shell. I'm going to start with the front since those wires are a little shorter, and then the back wires, and then we'll just place the shell carefully back on top. All right, so I'm not going to re-secure the base to the engine at this point. I'm just going to go give it a test. That way, if there's something that needs to be addressed, we can do it without having to take the screws back up. All right, so here we are back at the track. Let's go ahead and give it some juice. And there she goes. Let's switch direction. Oh, let's turn the bell on. And let's switch direction and give it some juice. All right. So can we go ahead and call this one good to go? So one last step, let's get those 4 screws back in. All right, and then once the screws are back in, you just want to check the movement of your bogies to make sure they're not restricted by the screws. And both of these look good. So let's go give this guy one more track test, and I think we'll call it good. All right, well, I think we've got this one 100% fixed. Looks like it's running great. All of the features are working. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next video.